So one of the amazing things about AI is that it has this incredible ability to analyze, summarize large amounts of data and to pull insights from that. So in this video, I wanted to show you how I go about using AI, specifically O1 and O1 Pro, to understand new projects really quickly and to analyze that. So along the way, I'm going to show you a couple tips and tricks, and we'll see how this all works. So just let me just dive in right away. So we've got this project here, View Vine. Now, a lot of people have been talking about this recently, and it's starting to get a little popular. So I wanted to check it out and see what actually is this thing about. What does it actually do? How do we write components using View Vine? I've got the basics. We can write multiple components in a single file, which is amazing. But how does it do that? How do we actually write it? What does the syntax look like? I don't know any of those things. So I've got the project up here. And instead of going to the actual documentation and reading that through, I want to start with the AI here. So what we'll do is we'll first actually find the documentation. So usually that's in this thing somewhere in packages. So here we've got docs. So now we found the folder where all of the documentation for this project is. And if we come up here to the URL, we change this G to a U. We go to UIT hub. We hit enter. Then this service does something really interesting. It actually takes everything that's in that GitHub repo at the folder that you are currently viewing and turns it into a flat text. And this is perfect so you can easily copy and paste this into your AI. So let me just zoom in here a little bit so you can see a bit more what's going on. So at the beginning, we've got this file tree, and then it lists out all of the files as we go along here. So one neat thing is that we can see how many tokens it is, 14,000. That's actually not too many tokens. But with AI, one of the key things here is that the more specific we can give it the context to the LLM and not give it like random things that are relevant, the better it will do for us. So one useful thing that I like to do is change this extension here to Markdown. And this will just give us, it'll filter out all of the like configuration and images and things like that that are in the documentation and only give us the markdown files that contain the actual text for that documentation. So that takes us down to about 11,000 tokens. And what we can do now is just hit copy. We've copied that whole thing in, and we're going to come over to O1, and we're just going to ask it to give us like a quick summary. And another tool that I like using is this tool called Whisper Flow, which allows you to talk straight into your microphone, and it transcribes it really, really well, but it also has like a little bit of AI formatting on it. So if you correct yourself, it'll like automatically correct the output, and a couple other things like that. I'll definitely link to that in the description. So let's just go ahead and I'll ask it something here. So I've got this documentation for a project called View Vine. I'd like you to give me a quick summary of what it does, why it's useful, why it's important, and give me a couple quick and concise code examples so that I can get an understanding of how to use this in my own Vue projects. So we'll let that transcribe, and there we go. It popped that in to the window there for us. And then I'm going to add in the documentation. So one thing that's also really useful, you may have seen this before, is adding in these XML tags. And specifically Claude and Sonnet, those models really love the XML tags. The OpenAI models seem to work really well with Markdown as well, but like XML tags like this also really great for that. So we've got our docs here. I'll just paste that in, and then I'm actually going to copy this entire message so that we can kick it off with O1, but then I can also kick it off with O1 Pro. And then we can see the differences of what they come back with. Typically, I've found that the responses are very, very similar. O1 Pro will take longer, but it's usually like 5%, 10% better. It does that like extra step, whereas O1 Pro or O1 might make some mistakes here and there. O1 Pro generally has fewer mistakes and like gives you that extra. Yeah, it's very similar. There's similar responses, but it's like if you got someone to spend like twice as long on a task, they're going to have that extra little bit of polish on that answer. So if we come over here, it should be done for us. So we'll scroll up to the top. So, okay, so what does it tell us? View Vine, it's an alternative way with a vine.ts file. All right. Fully supports TypeScript, has a companion VS Code extension. Okay, that's nice to know. I would assume that that's how we get like syntax highlighting in there and like other things to make sure that we're writing our Vine files correctly. Then we come in here, we could see why it's useful and important. Okay, so multiple components in one file, we knew that. TypeScript first, okay, that's great. And it's got these macro-based features. Okay, so this is something that I'm learning now. Vine prop, Vine emits, Vine style. Okay, so that seems similar. It's probably mapping to like define props, define emits, under the hood, the Vine style, because we don't have style blocks or a single style block. Maybe we have to attach specific styles to the different components that we're using. Okay, that makes sense. Familiar template syntax because it's the same thing. Compiled by the same compiler. Okay. So somehow it does like some sort of pre-compilation probably and then pipes that into Vue's compiler. Nice. And it works with existing single file component projects. All right. Okay. So we're getting a bit of an understanding of what this project does. And here we get, okay, quick setup. We can install it. We can see, okay, it's just a Vite plugin that we install. That's nice. Great. So here's a simple example. So we've got this component. We can pass in props as arguments into the function. Okay, that makes sense. This is very like React-like and very, I mean, just JavaScript-like. So that's nice. We have this special tagged template thing. And yeah, then we just write the component like a regular Vue component. Okay, that's cool. This other option, so we're using this Vine prop macro defining an optional start. So that's a prop there. Yeah, with numeric type. That's what it tells us. Optional prop with numeric type. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So we get a bit of an overview, and it gave us a bit more here too. A Vine expose macro as well. Okay, sweet. So now let's check out what O1 Pro did. Let's see if it's significantly different or if it gives us the same basic thing. So let's scroll up here. It looks like it gave us a bit more of a refined answer. So looks like similar kind of thing, multiple components, TypeScript, familiar template, cleaner organization. So it's useful, faster iteration. So you can create small helper subcomponents. Okay. Yeah. So that one I don't think O1 told us about. And why it's important. It fulfills a demand. Many views want something akin to the React model. There you go. O1 did not give us that. So O1 Pro is going that extra little bit to think about why is this actually important and in the context of the broader software development landscape here. And less context switching because instead of having multiple components, we don't have to jump back and forth between files. So O1 did not give us very much in terms of that. So in this case, O1 Pro definitely gives us something nicer. I usually try and do O1 and O1 Pro because O1 gives us faster response times, like we saw here, usually like 10 or 20 seconds for something like this, whereas O1 Pro might take 1, 2, 3 minutes. But O1 Pro usually has deeper, more thoughtful answers, as we can see. So let's check out the code examples. So gives us a basic hello world, like we saw, showing us how we can do multiple components in one file, slowly building up the complexity so we can understand it better. All right. So we can use props via a typed parameter. All right. And defining props with vine prop. Okay, so there we go. We got that. All right, so that's pretty neat. And so we've seen so far how we can understand the documentation. But up until this point, we could have just gone to the actual docs and read that. And in this way, we can actually, we're getting a little bit more than what the documentation would give us, because we can ask it questions, we can get specific examples, we can ask it, why is this actually important? And it gives us this succinct answers. We can continue this conversation and ask it even more stuff. But what I'd like to do next is actually something that the documentation doesn't offer us. And I'd like to see if we can get O1 to find any sort of undocumented features or anything that hasn't been included in the documentation. So I've gone over to this, the compiler package. We'll do the same process. We'll go to UIT hub here. And I'm going to open up a new O1 and a new O1 Pro. And if I paste, it should have the same thing before. So we've got the docs. I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm actually going to put in a little section for the code. And no, that's not what I wanted to do. We'll come back up here, edit that. Okay. I accidentally hit enter when I meant to hit shift enter. So in here, we've got the code for the compiler now. And so I'm going to filter by TypeScript to make sure we're just getting the actual code. I'm going to copy that in, and I'm going to paste that in to here. So we've got all of the code for the compiler and also the documentation. So I've given you the documentation for ViewVine as well as the code for the compiler for ViewVine. I would like you to list out any undocumented features, any undocumented things about the compiler that might be interesting or useful. Give me an extensive yet concise list as well. Give me some code examples along with that if you can. So we've given it some instructions here, and I'll send that one off. I'll send this one off as well. And now we will just wait for a moment. And so what it should do is go through and look at the documentation, look at the actual source code, and figure out the different things that the compiler can do, match that with the documentation, figure out what is included in the documentation, what is not, and give us an interesting answer. Hopefully we can find something in here. This all depends on what's actually in the documentation, and so we'll see. With Nuxt, I've found that there's a lot of stuff that's undocumented in Nuxt specifically because there's a lot of development happening with it. There's a lot of new features happening, and the docs are always lagging behind somewhat. And so there's some things that aren't covered in the documentation and some things that are only covered a little bit. So like the config in Nuxt often is just, it's hard to understand what the config actually does. And so this is a useful way of doing that. The problem is that with Next, it's such a large code base that we can't fit it all into context at once. So you have to like, same with this one. Well, I haven't tried to put the entire thing of ViewVine in. I don't know how much code is in here. But the compiler itself is 47,000 tokens. With O1, we can put in, I think, like up to 200. So not hitting that limit, but probably getting close if we included the whole thing. Okay, so it gave us a list. O1 Pro is still going. So let's look at what O1 gave us. Okay, so only one default Vine model allowed. There's logic enforcing that a Vine component can only have one default model call. I don't even know Vine model. We didn't learn about that at all. That's interesting. This must map to define model, and so then the fact that there's only one default, that would make sense because that's what Vue does. Maybe I can, if I go to the actual ViewVine website, maybe we'll be able to find that and can kind of confirm that. So I think there's macros here, Vine model. Vine model is not even listed on here. So that's something for you. Vine model. There you go. Automatic topological sorting of style imports. Okay, what does that mean? So it's going to sort your style imports. Okay, so yeah, it's making sure that the styling is imported in the correct way. Scope styles also rewrite keyframes and animations. Right. I mean, I think this is probably what Vue scoped styles are doing anyway. Interesting. VBind in CSS. So then it creates hashed variables specific to, because we've got multiple components and things like that. So I think this is similar to probably what Vue is doing under the hood. Okay, so bare call macros are strictly disallowed in variable declarations. What does that even mean? They must appear as a standalone statement, not wrapped in any variable assignment or destructuring. So you can't set Vine expose. Okay, that's useful. Let's see if there's anything else interesting. So these are kind of interesting, but not that great. Let's see what O1 Pro gave us. Scroll back up to the top. Probably is going to give us some better answers, but we'll see. Okay. So it's telling us if we can use await in our functions, and it'll automatically transform it for us. And it even gives us like some code on like what the transformation looked like. I wonder if that's actually correct or not. I guess we'll find out if we took a deeper look. Here we've got the bare call thing again. Style imports are topologically sorted. Inline versus non-inline template mode. Well, that's interesting. Oh, so the Vite plugin actually has options that you can pass to it. Huh. That's not in the documentation, at least that I could find, that this inline template thing. So by default, compiles each function in inline mode, so the template compiles to an inline render function. Okay, so it spits out like a setup with a render function. But if you set it to false, it puts a final render or SR render is appended on the component object. So I'm not entirely sure what that does or what that actually means. I mean, from here, I could ask it further, what does inline versus non-inline template mode mean? And we can continue and dig a little bit deeper and understand more of what's going on with ViewVine. Of course, We also want to double check that all of this is actually correct, and that if you learn something interesting here, you can dig into the code and actually read it for yourself and make sure that the LLM is not hallucinating here. These are typically pretty good. O1 and O1 Pro are typically pretty good with not hallucinating, but sometimes that does happen. But it is useful to know, oh, these CSS variables, they're hashed when you use vbind. There you go. You learn something new. You can't use props or vine prop at the same time. You have to choose one or the other. That's an interesting thing to know. You'd probably figure that out if you tried to do it and you got an error, but that's not necessarily documented anywhere. According to my cursory glance through the documentation earlier. And let's see, yeah, just like other things that the compiler does just to make sure things work. Okay, so we could go through this whole thing and like understand it, a deeper dive if we wanted, and because these take a while to actually process, I might have 3 or 4 or 5 of these going, kick them off, and then get a bunch of insights. And we've been going for like 20 minutes, something like that. And we've got a pretty good understanding of ViewVine, how it works. We've got some options, things that are not even in the documentation that we've learned about. And so obviously the next step would be to actually write code, because there's only so much you can learn from reading the documentation. But it is useful to get a good overview and understand what's going on. And now I can decide, do I want to use ViewVine? If I do start to work on it, then I know where to go. I know what it can do, what it can't do a bit better. And of course, you can like iterate through this. You can write some code, come back, ask it some more questions about why doesn't this work? How does this part work? As you gain more experience with actually writing and using the tool. So that is basically how I use AI to help me understand things pretty quickly. It's great for finding like little insights and things like that in your code, in other people's code. And again, just want to stress that you should be double checking and fact checking the LLM anytime you do this. It's 98% of the time, I would say, it's very good and it doesn't make stuff up, especially O1 Pro. O1, a bit more. But yeah, you always want to make sure that these things are not lying to you, because they like to do that. So see you in the next one.